Kendall and Cooper Talk Mysteries. I'm Julie Cooper, a mystery and thriller writer, and half of the duo bringing you our regular podcast series, spotlighting mystery, suspense, and thriller fiction. First, thanks once more to my brother Chris Squires for our wonderful theme song, The Man in the Panama Hat. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that it's September 11th, and I'm remembering this morning 17 years ago, an event that changed all of us. Over to you, Wendy.
Thanks, Julie. Wendy Kendall here, cozy mystery writer, and we've got a wild episode today with our guest mystery author, Kathleen Kaska. Best known for her Kate Carraway Animal Rights mystery series, as well as author of the Sidney Lockhart mysteries, Kathleen Kaska has also published trivia books on today's favorite mystery writers. She teaches workshops and is a contributing writer to multiple magazines. Kathleen also authors the classic Triviography mystery series. Her Alfred Hitchcock and Sherlock Holmes trivia books were finalists for the 2013 Epic Award in Nonfiction. She's also marketing director for Cave Art Press. And her 5-minute writing tips blog posts are published in book form. Do you have a catharsis handy? 5-minute writing tips. And a note here to check out her website, KathleenKaska.com. It's excellent. When not writing, Kathleen spends much of her time traveling the country's back roads and byways, bird watching, and looking for new locales for her mysteries. It was her passion for birds that led to her book, The Man Who Saved the Whooping Crane, the Robert Porter Allen story, published in 2012. In the spring of 1941, the whooping crane was written off as a species destined for extinction. The recovery became possible thanks to this ornithologist with the National Audubon Society. This author splits her time between her two favorite places, the Pacific Northwest and the Texas coast. Welcome, Kathleen Kaska.
Thanks, Julie and Wendy, for having me on Talk Mysteries. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're excited to chat with you today. And today's episode theme is inspired from a passage in your Animal Rights Mysteries book, Run Dog Run. So bear with me for a moment as I paraphrase just a little. She had ignored her number one rule for survival: never question her intuition. She was used to seeing the kill in a killer's eyes, as with the predators on the African plains. It was impossible to hide. Her binoculars would be focused on the eyes of the big cats, lions and cheetahs motionless in the grass, leopards crouched in trees. Their prey would see it too. An instinctual fear would shoot through the air like a bolt of electricity. It was survival in its most raw form. Prey who misread the signals did not survive. A killer could lie, deceive, and even charm victims, but could never hide that look in the eyes. I can't describe it any better than that by our guest author. So here's to mysteries victims and potential targets as they recognize their threat and fight for survival. In your remarkable Run Dog Run in the Kate Carraway series, I'm drawn into the plot immediately by a tug at my heart when Kate's goddaughter asks for her help with a mystery about possible racing greyhound dog abuse on a neighboring Texas ranch. My passions as a reader are stirred along with the protagonists. As an author, how are you creating that empathy for potential victims? And what do you do to make a reader care?
Well, Wendy, I'm happy you felt that passion and empathy for Kate, and that's also important to me. That means I did my job. My goal is to tap into the reader's emotions early on, so they are intrigued and they are pulling for my protagonist, no matter what their quest. But to think about it, who doesn't feel for the innocents who are exploited or mistreated? And I think if an author instills her passion into a story, the reader can pick up on it and feel for the hero and the victim. Animal rights has always been an issue that I've clearly cared about, and I think readers understand the injustice of harming those who can't help themselves.
Well, I really felt it right from the start of your books. In your mysteries...
Oh, good.
Oh, definitely. In your mysteries, I found you to be a master at planting clues along the way. How does a mystery author figure out the where, when, and what about revealing clues?
Oh, Wendy, that's a great question, but it's a tough question for me to answer. I wish I had a formula for that. It would definitely make writing easier, but I'm a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. So I know a lot of writers who outline their stories before they start, and I tried this method, and it just didn't work for me. So I love the spontaneity of writing because I never know where my characters and the storyline will take me. And that holds true for planning or revealing clues. Sometimes I just have to have a feel for where they go, and that usually works as I'm writing. But then again, it's not as easy as it sounds. After the first draft is completed, I go and I start from the beginning, and I start looking and making notes as to where I place those clues and the red herrings. And then sometimes I have to move them around to find them a better place. So the key is just to provide enough information to keep the reader guessing, but not so much to have the reader figure out the solution in the middle of the book. But at the same time, a writer can never just like pull the rabbit out of the hat. Everything has to be there that the reader needs to solve the mystery. And what helps me with that is using my writer's critique group. I trust that they will find and point out to me when I fall short. But, back to your question, how do I figure out where these clues are going to go? It's just it just flows. And I just have to follow along and trust that I know what's going to happen. But then I have to go back and I have to check it out, make sure that all the loose ends are tied up and that everything makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Well, I'm sort of disappointed I didn't get a formula.
Well, that would be easy for us writers if there was. But I just have to see what's going to happen and just trust that I can put it together. And so far, everything's worked.
It's really good advice, and I think I have to work on that trust a little bit more in my own writing.
Well, the fun thing about being a pantser is that, it's writing a book is like reading. I never know what's going to happen. I never know who's going to show up. And a good example of that is in my Sidney Lockhart mystery, Murder at the Driscoll. I had no plans for this certain character to be in the book, but she just appeared, and she was just a delightful character. And I don't know where she came from, but she's a 12-year-old who is much smarter than my protagonist, and she becomes a real important part of the story. And so she was just a great addition, and she shows up in the 5th book as well. And so that's what I enjoy about writing, is it's spontaneous. So
I like that. I really like what you said too about being a writer is like being a reader. You're going along and you don't know exactly what's going to happen. I like that. Nice quote. Well, sometimes your characters, not just yours, but sometimes just characters in general, miss the signs or misunderstand or misdiagnose or misinterpret. And then that can either put themselves or others then in danger of becoming victims. How does an author use this technique to engage the reader in the intrigue without frustrating the reader?
Well, I have to say that an author can't make it easy on the protagonist. Otherwise, it would bore the daylights out of a reader. So being frustrated isn't really so bad. So I have to consider my protagonist's greatest fear, and I have to make her face it several times in the story. So I have to put her at risk and allow her to walk into danger and make mistakes, and I have to put obstacles in her path. So I think this adds to the suspense. No matter what genre you're writing, it helps the reader turn the pages. So I focus on the character's greatest fear. For instance, Kate in Run Dog Run, her greatest fear is failure. She recently came from a bad situation where she feels that she failed herself and others miserably, and now she feels that she has to make up for it with her helping her goddaughter figure out what's going on with the greyhounds. So back to your question on frustration. You have to give your hero some downtime so the reader can catch her breath. But you've got to toss in some hope so your reader won't drown in anxiety. So there's a balance there. So having your reader frustrated at times is a good thing. But then you have to give them some hope that things are going to work out, and it adds some more frustration, and just kind of go back and forth. And I feel that adds to the tension and the suspense of the book.
Interesting. Well, to use another quote from your book, Run Dog Run, good judgment was often lost in a moment of passion. Can you talk about the importance of passion in mysteries' villains and also heroes?
Yes, I think readers, and I know all of us can identify with that moment of passion when good judgment is lost. Most murders are committed in an emotional rage. They're not premeditated. So in that sense, when you think about it, everyone is a potential villain. It's a human characteristic that people can identify with. We've all been close to that breaking point. Most of us don't wind up killing someone over it, but I think we can understand when that happens out of this emotional rage. So, you can think about the time an aggressive driver just really made you angry. They were tailgating you because you weren't driving fast enough. They cut you off in traffic and sounded their horn all the way down the highway. You hear about road rage villains and victims all the time. And if we're honest with ourselves, I think we can admit to being both. Fortunately, most of us check our behavior and not lose control. But then you have to think about it this way, is that villains are not always bad people. They're desperate people. They're scared. They're struggling to survive. And so they're often they react out of emotion. And I think most readers can understand that. And so that adds to, the passion in a mystery, because you have to show both sides of your villain and your hero so you can feel for both of them.
That's such a good reminder for me to make sure that I'm tapping into that emotion in my writing. That's great. Well, where there are victims, there are other characters who often voice their own regrets and maybe how they could have helped or prevented, or that they should have recognized the danger. Can you talk about the importance of regrets expressed by characters in a mystery? How does that propel the plot, and what does regret contribute to character growth?
Well, your main character, especially if you're writing a series, has to change and grow, which is what we all do. We make mistakes, we do things that we regret, and we try not to repeat them. As a result, most of us become better people for it, like with the road rage incident. If we were the instigator, it might scare us into being a better, more patient driver. If we'd been victimized, We promise ourselves we'll never treat others that way. In Run Dog Run, Kate hit her breaking point and she reacted, causing major turmoil in her and her husband's life. So she's now faced with a similar situation, and she wants to keep her wits about her because she has regrets for what she did in the past, and she hopes not to repeat it. But she's not sure that she can hold on to her emotions because of all this baggage she's carrying with her. But your character growth also makes for a great subplot. Like when she's trying to solve a mystery, she's always dragging around her baggage or regrets, and that makes her task a lot harder. I just finished reading A Cuckoo's Calling by Robert Galbraith, pseudonym for J.K. Rowling.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great mystery. The main character is a PI named Cormoran Strike, and in the past, he felt that he let his mother down by not questioning the circumstances of her death, and he had regrets about this, but he ran away and enlisted into the Army so he wouldn't have to deal with the situation. Well, this heavy regret that he's carrying around propels him forward in his quest to help others in his business. So, regret just not only helps the character grow, but it actually adds some suspension and some substance to your plot.
Ah, right. It definitely does in that, yeah. Well, your Sidney Lockhart Mysteries series are historical mysteries in the 1950s. I love it that each is set in a different grand hotel. So you've got Murder at the Luther, Murder at the Arlington, Murder at the Galvez, and so on. I just love this idea for a setting. What triggered the idea, and what do you most enjoy and least enjoy about historical research?
Well, I love reading lighthearted and humorous mysteries as well as thrillers. It adds a nice balance. So I naturally write what I love to read. The Sidney Lockhart series has been compared to Janet Ivanovich's Stephanie Plum series, which I've read every one of those. So I've always had it in the back of my mind to try my hand at something light and humorous. But I wanted the series to be set in the 50s because that's the decade in which I grew up. But what triggered the series was once when my husband we were staying at the Arlington Hotel in Hot Springs. We stay there many times, and we always stay in the same room. And one time when we checked in, our room wasn't quite ready, so we had to wait a couple hours, and we were kind of jokingly speculating on what the cause for the delay would have been. And I said, well, maybe they found a dead body in the bathtub. and then that idea just kind of mushroomed. And then by the end of the week when we were there, I had the whole character of Sidney in mind. I had the beginning of the story, and I thought, oh gosh, wouldn't it be fun to set the series in a different historic hotel? And then it just developed. And then I came out with the Luther Hotel, which is another place that we stayed a lot. It's on the Texas coast. I have to also say that the hotels I choose are still in business today.
Oh.
So I would like the readers to be able to go to these hotels and see for themselves what I was writing about. The Luther Hotel is a fine little hotel that's been owned by the Luther family since the 40s, and it was also referred to as the Texas White House because this is where LBJ and Lady Bird stayed. And so, the history behind that hotel is incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, and so then I set one at the Galvez Hotel in Galveston, Texas, and the 50s were a great time in Galveston because Galveston was kind of a notorious town with gambling and gangsterdom, so I got to bring that into the story. But what I love, of course, I love staying at hotels. That's part of my research, but I also like finding out the details of what the hotels were like, what the decor was like, and the menu, and the entertainment. And I read through old newspapers to find out what was going on in the city or the town where the hotels are located. And I also try to look for an event that I could possibly use as a plot for the mysteries. In other words, the murder at the Galvez, I was looking through the Galveston Daily newspaper and found out that in the early 50s there was a very controversial Pelican Island development project going on. So I used that as a plot in the story. So, the research is just a lot of fun. I don't know if there's anything frustrating about it because it's just like a treasure hunt.
Oh.
I never know what I'm going to find, and I really enjoy the research. So I guess what could be frustrating is not being able to find out the information I need or to make sure that it's reliable. So I try to make everything as accurate as possible for that time frame, down to the point of the names of the other restaurants in town and the names of the streets and the names of maybe, let's say, for instance, the music group that was playing at the hotel, or I just try to make it as authentic as possible.
Fantastic. It really comes through in the reading, too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'm learning from your Do You Have a Catharsis Handy 5-minute writing tips book. Would you share? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. It was a fun book to write, let me tell you.
Well, I was hoping that maybe you would pick one tip to share with our listeners today about mystery writing, something from either the book or the blog.
Well, let me talk a little bit about the book and how it came about. Catharsis is a tongue-in-cheek book about those grammar and punctuation rules that we learned in school but often forget. It's also about writing tips and writing styles, where to find inspirations, and I even have a section on the down and dirty of writing and publishing. So really, it can be used for any type of writing, not just mysteries, but just any type of writing that you do. When I started working for Cave Art Press as a marketing director, I wanted to write a humorous blog that was beneficial to both authors and readers. And so that's what I did. And it was just a fun way of showing how to edit your books and how to find inspiration and ideas. And so anyway, after I published a few of the blogs, I had some of my readers tell me, "Oh, these are great. You should put them in a book." So after about a year, I had enough of them that we decided to release them in a book. And I have to say that I have to mention the title. Do you have a catharsis handy? I work for a couple who owns a publishing company, and they're wonderful people, and they're in their 80s. And the husband, Don, is a very gregarious guy, and he's always we're not sure if it's on purpose or as a mistake, but he's always mangling his words. And he came into the office one day and he goes, "Oh my God," he said, "does anybody have a catharsis handy?" And so what he was trying to say was a thesaurus, but it came out catharsis. And so when we started putting the book together, we were trying to decide, well, what would be a good title. And so I was looking through what we call Don's Dawnisms, and I came across that one, and I said, oh gosh, this would be a great title for the book. So that's how that came about. But back to your original question, so I don't know if there's anything specific I can use in the book for writing mysteries, but it's just for writing in general and finding inspiration for whatever kind of story you're writing.
Fantastic. Well, I'm definitely learning a lot from it. And Kathleen, I'm so excited that you're going to treat us to a reading today.
Okay, great. So I'm going to read from Run Dog Run, and this is a part where Kate is trying to find out what's really happening with the greyhounds. She's getting conflicting stories, and she really needs to get on the ranch where the greyhounds are raised and trained and see for herself what's going on. But there's already been a murder committed. The owner of the greyhounds has been arrested, and getting on the ranch is not an easy thing. And her goddaughter, Rosalinda, who got her into this, was supposed to be with her, and they were supposed to go sneak onto the ranch together. And Rosalinda had to back out at the last minute, so Kate is alone at night on the ranch where she's not supposed to be. Standing out here in the darkness, doubting her decision to come alone, was getting Kate nowhere. She crept toward the kennel. Maybe a look among Wayne's things might prove useful. There were no windows in his tack room, and if she could get inside, a sweep with the flashlight should go unnoticed. In order to not to disturb the dogs, she retraced her steps and skirted the area a few yards away. Then she moved behind the kennel toward the office. She reached the back of the building, waited, and listened. Nothing. She walked around to the front, but stayed close to the building. The bunkhouse was located past the barn about 50 yards away, and she had a clear view of the front of the Fordyce house. Kate continued on only noticing a row of trash cans seconds before she bumped into one. She grabbed it before it toppled over and caused the domino of the other cans lined up along the wall. The can was plastic and made little noise when she righted it, but she stopped just the same to make sure no one heard. Kate's breath caught in her throat. The sound of raspy, intermittent breathing was so close it made her hair rise on the back of her neck. She pressed her back tight to the wall and listened. Slowly she looked back from where she had come. She saw no one. Then the breathing stopped. It could not have come from the dogs. They were too far away, and the breathing seemed only inches away. Maybe she had imagined it. All she heard now was the pounding of her own blood rushing through her head. In her near collision with the can, Kate dropped her flashlight. She squatted down and groped around for it. Then she heard the sound again. Closer this time. Someone was struggling to breathe. There was no mistaking it. She looked around, forcing her eyes to focus in the darkness. Their breathing was now accompanied by a faint whine. Someone was hurt and lying close enough for Kate to touch.
Ah, thank you. Very suspenseful. Well, I've got a few questions for you as well, Kathleen.
Great.
It's said that every writer recreates some aspects of themselves in their protagonist. What parts of you ended up inside Sydney Lockhart?
Well, I wish I could say that I'm a lot like Sydney. She says and does things I don't have the nerve to say and do. But as far as what parts of me I put into Sydney, I like to think that I'm a strong, independent person. And so I've made Sydney that. But I also like to think things through. But Sydney's more prone to react. as far as that goes, as far as how we're alike, we both have a science background. We have an adventurous spirit, and at times we doubt ourselves. So we're also both into birding. I'm a better birder than she is, but she trumps me on everything else. So I try to put myself in her, but then I try to make her a stronger and bolder person, and someone that I wish I could be, but I can't.
Nice. Okay. Birds figure prominently in at least one of your books, and the nonfiction book, The Man Who Saved the Whooping Crane, specifically. It sounds as if you have a real heart for birds, rescue greyhounds, and other animals. So can you tell us more about your animal rights mystery series and how that came to be?
Right. Yes. The inspiration behind the Kate Carraway Animal Rights series and my biography about Robert Porter Allen, who saved the whooping cranes, what grew from when I was a volunteer as I was a wildlife rehabber for wildlife rescue in Austin. And our goal was to take in orphaned and injured wildlife and raise and care for them with the purpose of releasing them back into the wild. And most of the animals that needed rescuing were birds, and so that's what I worked with. So I write what I'm passionate about. So Run Dog Run is about saving greyhounds, so greyhounds don't have the best life. They're kind of disposable in a certain sense of the term. It's just heartbreaking for me to think about this. So I wanted to, when I started writing, I wanted to instill my ideas for animals and animal rescue in my series. In book number 2, a Two-Horse Town, which is going to be released next spring, deals with saving wild horses in Montana. And in book number 3, Eagle Crossing, which is finished and is in line, is about an animal rescue facility on Lopez Island here in the Pacific Northwest. So from my experience in working with injured and orphaned wildlife, I wanted to write about that because I wanted to write a series in which people could learn something and then hopefully inspire them to make a difference.
Right.
Same with the Robert Porter Allen story. The whooping cranes were almost extinct in the 40s, and through the work he did, bringing them back from extinction was remarkable. And so what I decided to do was, when I wrote the book and it got published, I decided to donate my royalties to the Whooping Crane Foundation because it's something that was just really important to me.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Well, that's taking writing into activism in a way. So I love that.
Yeah, right.
And speaking of loving certain things, I love old hotels, the grand structures of a bygone era that we truly can't afford to build anymore. And as Wendy mentioned, your Sidney Lockhart mystery series is set in some historic Southwestern hotels, including the Galvez in Galveston, Texas. And I think you've already answered my question partially, that you have spent time, I think, in all these hotels, and they are still open for business. But are there any others on your list for a future Sidney Lockhart book?
Yes. I'm working on number 5 right now, and this one is Murder at the Minger, and it takes place in the historic Minger Hotel in San Antonio, which is right across the street from the Alamo. Oh. And that's a real interesting place, and it's kind of funny because a lot of these hotels are often reported to be haunted, and they have just a great history with a lot of mystery and intrigue. So I decided to set the 5th one in San Antonio, but for number 6, I'm thinking about going to New Orleans. Oh. And I love New Orleans. I love the city. I think it would be a great place to figure out what was going on in the 1950s in that city. I have a few hotels in mind. There's the historic Roosevelt on Canal Street, and there's a Pontchartrain, which is in the Garden District, and that's where Tennessee Williams wrote A Streetcar Named Desire.
Oh, right.
And yeah. And then there's a hotel in the French Quarter called the Monteleone. So early next year, I plan to go and check out some of these places, decide where, I want to set the story, and then check in for a week.
What a fun research trip.
Oh, yeah. And so I'm always looking for ideas. So if there are readers out there that have that know of historic hotels that they think I might be interested in, well, send them to me.
Okay.
Because
well,
I'm always looking for it.
I have a few suggestions for you. I'm thinking of, I think it's called the Melrose Hotel in Dallas, Texas, which is reputed to be haunted as well. And I had an interesting stay there long, long ago. And then, of course, there's a Hotel del Coronado in San Diego that
yes.
definitely they say has some additional guests who've checked in and never checked out. But what a fascinating way to, start a mystery series and to keep it going. I love that. And also to encourage readers to kind of explore different parts of the United States, maybe that they've never visited before. So.
Oh, yeah. And the mystery Murder at the Luther set in the Old Lutheran Hotel in Palacios. I had a couple of book signings there, and then shortly afterwards, I had a book group contact me and say that they were going to the Luther Hotel for the weekend and they were taking a tour of the hotel in the town using my book as a guide.
Oh.
So that was real fun for me. And then I had another reader this was in Hot Springs, Arkansas, who told me that he's a local, he lives there, and that he read my book in the lobby of the hotel.
Oh.
Sitting in the lobby of the hotel, and he read my book there in the hotel.
That would be a blast.
So, that's great. Yeah, I know. It makes me feel really good because I want people to be interested in the locale as well as the story.
Great. And getting back to Sydney Lockhart, she's a very independent, single working woman. She starts out as a journalist in the 1950s, and this was an era back when a lot of young women were working on their MRS degrees, more interested in getting married, instead of solving murder mysteries. Why is she such a rebel against prevailing standards of her very conservative time?
Well, I grew up in the 50s when women had fewer career opportunities than they do today. And I wanted Sydney to be ahead of her time. And in making her strong and in setting the decade in the 50s, my message was one of encouragement. It was like, well, if Sydney could be successful in breaking the norms during the 50s, it might help inspire those of us who are, here today and still having doubts of our potential. So I wanted Sydney to be strong and different, and but at the same time, she is independent, but she also feels the need for that life of romance and love, and but she kind of fights with that. That's kind of in her mind. In the first book, she meets a very attractive man, and so she has all these contradictory feelings, like she wants to be independent, but yet she kind of wants to pursue this. So, and I think that was true for, a lot of women, and it still is, having to make a choice or feeling that they have to make a choice, and it's hard. So I wanted her to be a type of character who was very realistic. She is very motivated, but then she has all these other issues underlying who she really is.
I like that. It seemed like a very natural way to really work in the conflict between, her aspirations as an independent woman and the more traditional role expectations of the 50s. So well done. And I know you've talked a little bit about another Sydney Lockhart mystery coming up, and some more in the animal rights series. Is there anything else that you're working on now that you can tell us about?
Yes, yes, I am putting the final touches on a hard-boiled detective novel set in Manhattan in the 40s. I love Raymond Chandler and Nero Wolfe and Dashiell Hammett. I love those old hard-boiled detective stories, and so I wanted to write that, and it's done. But I need to do some editing, and my main character is a PI. He's suffering from PTS disorder, or as they called it back then, shell shock,
Right.
from his time in the war. And so he's back in Manhattan, and he's fallen on hard times. He's lost his job, he's lost his wife, he's lost his swanky apartment, and he's pretty much having to start over. And as a result, he drinks too much to relieve his stress, and that causes him to go out and start pushing people's buttons and basically making his bad situation worse. So an important case comes his way, and for him, it's either sink or swim. So, I'm showing this detective who is just struggling to get his life back in order, at the same time trying to solve this mystery.
Right. Well, it sounds like it's going to be a situation ripe for lots of conflict and tension, and we'll look forward to that. And I'm going to jump into my segment now and combine it with a little levity. I'm talking today about literary deathmatch. That's right. You heard me correctly. Literary deathmatch. With a name like that, you know I had to check it out. It's a series of events created and curated by Adrian Todd Zuniga, which melds the literary salon and the performing aspects of a poetry jam, along with, as their website puts it, rapier-witted quips of American Idol's judging without any meanness, and the ridiculousness and hilarity of Double Dare. In other words, a three-ring circus of a public reading series featuring a mix of 4 famous or emerging authors who perform a 7-minute riff on their most electric writing before a live audience and a panel of 3 all-star judges. The judges focus on literary merit, performance quality, and intangibles, along with what I'm sure are some outstanding wise-ass commentary, and then they select their favorites to advance to the finals. The 2 finalists will compete to determine who takes home the literary deathmatch crown. And yes, there is a real crown. The original goal of the group's founders was to skewer, as they put it, the preciousness of literary fiction, and to encourage innovative ways to present text off the page. It may sound audacious and even a little harebrained, but the reading and judging process creates a relationship from writer to viewer, another one of their goals. Literary deathmatch has been performed in major cities the world over, from Amsterdam to Washington, D.C., and every place in between, including smaller cities such as Seattle and Tulsa, Oklahoma. You know I'll be on the lookout for future offerings in venues wherever I can find them. You can find out more and view a video at www.literarydeathmatch.com as they continue to showcase literature as a brilliant and unstoppable medium. It sounds like great fun.
That does sound fun. Well, today I'm going to talk about thrillers as a feminist battleground. With the many examples of strong female characters from Kathleen's works, I was curious to research information about feminism in mysteries. I did this especially with the help of Sadie Trombetta's August article in online bustle.com, where I'm learning that thrillers and crime novels have been a feminist battleground, a place where women characters fight for their lives and women authors may fight for their livelihood. After Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl in 2012, the popularity of female-centric thriller and crime novels exploded. The mystery genre expanded to include domestic thrillers by not only Gillian Flynn, but also Paula Hawkins, Ruth Ware, and others. According to Crime Reads editor Molly Odintz, female-centric thriller and crime novels have always been around. They just haven't always been on readers' radars. Crime by the Book blogger and Penguin Random House publicist Abby Endler, who traces female-oriented crime novels, says Gillian Flynn and Paula Hawkins seem to tap directly into an undercurrent that had been building for a long time. The world suddenly took notice of female-centric crime fiction with a new intensity. Crime Reads editor Molly Odintz says, horror, exploitation, and crime are all much kinder to angry and frustrated women characters than general fiction seems to be, or society seems to be. They're front and center. Their wants are acknowledged, their fears are treated seriously, and their vengeance is sweet and much deserved. Still, there are critics, largely because of the way thrillers and crime fiction rely on violence toward women. In January, author and screenwriter Bridget Lawless announced the Staunch Book Prize, a new literary award for the best thriller in which no woman is beaten, stalked, sexually exploited, raped, or murdered. It's a debate. There are some who applaud this attempt to minimize women's pain. Others point to the many ways in which violence can be used as a powerful tool to explore, not exploit, women's issues. As I've said on this podcast in previous episodes, it seems to me that any subject that's worth knowing about, you can talk about within a crime novel. And when a book is as successful as Gone Girl, publishing isn't going to ignore a trend. It's going to try to replicate it. In doing that, we've been introduced to a wonderful list of contemporary women authors and the new domestic thriller subgenre. And I've got a recommendation for our listeners today. It's a new movie titled Searching. I wanted to see this movie from Stage 6 Films because it's a mystery movie in a different visual style on the big screen. It's a hyper-modern thriller told using the variety of technology devices we all use every day to communicate. The story's told through viewing on the big screen, characters communicating via laptop, cell texts, videos, online, such as YouTube and other sites, even online TV news, etc. You get the idea. The average regular man character, David, is thrown into a crisis situation and must trace his teenage daughter's digital footprints before she disappears forever. Storytelling in a movie that's told completely through the characters' devices and their social media footprints was an exciting way to reveal indications about the different characters' and suspects' personalities. It was also fascinating to discover things about the victim's personality through her own online musings, what she shared with others online, and what was found in her laptop files. Treat yourself to this tightly woven mystery with well-planted clues along the way. I was completely drawn into the mystery and have to admit that I eagerly grabbed at a couple of the red herrings as it unfolded. The ending to the mystery was one of those satisfying resolutions where you can look back and see how all the clues most certainly line up to the motive, means, and opportunity exploited by this villain. Kathleen, what mystery would you like to recommend to our listeners today?
Well, if I had to pick one, it would be Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. It's just a classic. And it has everything. It has suspense and intrigue and a great, great twist at the end.
Oh, lovely. One of my all-time favorite, truly. And I'm talking today and recommending The Gift of Fear. The line from Kathleen's mystery that Wendy mentioned earlier about the prey who misread the signals did not survive struck a real chord, and I thought of this book. Guess what? This is not a mystery, it's not a writing craft book, but it's something along the lines of self-help and maybe more important. The Boston Globe described the book, The Gift of Fear, as a how-to book that reads like a thriller. With his talk of women as the victims of choice in many mysteries and the frequency of violence against women in the news, whether it's the aftermath of the Me Too movement or working, traveling, or going off to college for the first time, I thought I'd pass along a book that you and your family members can't afford to miss. The Gift of Fear, Survival Signals That Protect Us from Violence by Gavin de Becker was published back in 1997 and is still in print because of the advice contained. It's timeless. Gavin is a 3-time presidential appointee whose pioneering security work and his threat analysis firm has changed the way our government evaluates threats against our nation's highest officials. He says that true fear is often the signal that can save your life if you listen and pay attention. Here are some quick examples. That babysitter that you hired makes you uneasy. You sense you are being followed. And yes, this did happen to me once in a parking garage. Lucky for me, I instinctively did the right thing. Or the boss, or the employee your boss just fired who shouts, "You'll be sorry," as he leaves the building. Or that guy in the elevator you're about to enter just doesn't look right. This book breaks down common misconceptions about crime and violence based on de Becker's years of experience, research, and provides some proven wisdom that can save your life. He teaches basic concepts for refusing to be a victim and learning how to protect yourself. Bob Ressler, an FBI profiler, once called this book a modern-day survival guide for everyone in our society. I've got to caution our listeners, this is not a book for children. The book opens with a real-life case study on a young woman who survived a brutal rape and narrowly escaped being a homicide victim. The lessons and techniques can and should, however, be shared with children in ways that are appropriate for their level of understanding. And de Becker's also written a follow-up, Protecting the Gift, Keeping Children and Teenagers Safe and Parents Sane. All I've got to say is, fight evil, read this book.
That sounds really good.
In closing, keep reading and keep writing. And don't forget to subscribe to Kendall Cooper Talk Mysteries so you never miss an episode. Thanks again to our special guest, Kathleen Kaska, for joining us today and talking about animal rights, historic mysteries, and a host of other things. Thanks again.